Hello guys, welcome to the stream. I'm up friend John by Manoj, and we have two special guests today with us, international film critics, Josh Hurtado and Mike McCahill. Welcome guys on the panel. And today,
thank you for having us.
Thank you. And today we'll be talking about a film that no one knows about. It's like, very underrated film. And just, I think it just crossed like 1,000 crores. I don't know. Very less, but Triple R by the great S.S. Rajamouli. And we'll be diving into it. We'll be getting into spoilers. So if you haven't seen the film, please go watch it. We'll be spoiling it for you. And we'll talk about its global appeal, why it's working so well, and all of that. But before we start, okay, first let me know in the chat. Is everything fine? Can you hear us?
The audio, yeah.
Audio, video, all good? If you can let us know in the chat. And I've actually put up a poll in the chat asking how many times you've seen the film. And we have 34 votes, 28% once, 19% twice, 28% more than 2 times. I'm one of them. And 25% none. So we have all kinds of people. All right, everything is great. Thank you, all content. Thank you, Pravan. And you can, begin our session. But before we get to RRR, I would like you guys to quickly introduce yourself to the people who don't know about you and where they can find your work and everything. Josh?
Sure, I'll go first. My name is Josh Hurtado. I write for ScreenAnarchy.com and have for the last 12 years. Just started writing for the Austin Chronicle here in Texas. I also am a programming consultant with Fantastic Fest in Austin, Texas, and I consult with other genre and fantastic film festivals around the world when it comes to South Asian film.
Great. Mike?
And I am Mike McCahill. I have written about Indian cinema since 2003 when I was writing back in my formative days for the Scotsman newspaper, and I became the Guardian's Indian correspondent for 5 years or so in the middle of the last decade, and I've done a few pieces for them ever since, as well as writing for the Telegraph and Little White Lies, and currently writing for Reader's Digest and my own blog Synesthesia, which you can find out there on the internet.
All right, and guys, I'm sure you know Manoj, so we can skip that part.
Yeah. He's a man who needs no introduction. and also the man who's getting no introduction, clearly.
All right. So my first question would be, because you both have been, exploring Indian cinema for a long time. It's not the first time. And you have seen a lot of things. You have seen the growth and what has happened throughout the decade for Indian cinema internationally. So my first question would be, instead of going directly why you liked RRR, I want to go, why do you think that RRR is getting that big of a hype outside India compared to, I think Bahubali also got, but not as much as Triple R. And I think S.S. Rajamouli also stated that he was really surprised that international critics and audiences are really loving it, especially in the US and the UK. So what do you think what was different this time?
I'll be honest. I when I first heard the concept behind the film, it felt like it would be not a step backwards, but not as globally appreciated as Bahubali was, and just because it's very based in, conceptually, it's based in historical characters in India, which I think puts sort of a barrier up. If you don't. Before you see the film, when I saw it, I was like, "Oh no, it doesn't matter at all. Like none of that matters. It's pure spectacle. It's pure heart. It is so engaging, and it's so earnest about everything that it does. And that's something that Western film is lacking and has sort of faded away. Is the earnestness. So there's a lot of cynicism in Western blockbusters that there's just not in this film. And I think that's what people are responding to.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I also think that there's something about the moment that we passed through. We've had this 2-year pause for the pandemic, and there's been this kind of frustrated desire for big movies on the big screen. A lot of stuff has been, diverted to streaming in the last couple of years. And so what has happened in the last couple of months is, particularly here in the UK, we've had one big Indian title after another, starting with Pushpa at the back end of last year, December, which went top 10 over here. We've had one big movie after another. We've had Gangubai Kathiawadi, we've had Radheshayam, we've had the Kashmir Files, and then RRR comes along, and they've all gone top 10 over here, which is some achievement given that by and large the leading multiplex chains here in the UK tend to put on one indie movie a week on one screen, and you get 1 week and that's it, and then the next one comes in. But in the last few weeks, because these films have been doing such great business, and I think people are starting to come back to the cinema in big enough numbers for them to justify holding films over. So they're getting 2 or 3 weeks at a time. There's also a level of sort of practical benefit for having one big movie after another, in that you're showing trailers for the upcoming releases before. So people are sort of getting into the rhythm of going back they know there are big films coming up, and they're going back over and over again. I did sort of wonder the other day whether 83, which did sort of okay at the box office internationally, but certainly didn't do Rajamouli style numbers, whether that would have done better if it'd come out after Christmas, if it had been part of this cycle of new big Indian movies, whether it would have performed better than it did. I know it did okay, but it could have been a major blockbuster. So yeah, people are finding their way back to the cinemas, and as Josh said, in terms of spectacle, this is about as spectacular as you could possibly want, without all that sort of baggage that those big American superhero movies are now bringing to the multiplex.
Yeah. For me, I think we were talking before we started that for me, Bahubali 2 was the film that really blew me away and made me understand what cinema is. When I went to the theater, the point the movie started, I was lost. I think for US, it's like, the Star Wars or the Empire Strikes Back, like people really understood really that impact of cinema. So I'm to ask each one of you, which was that movie for you in your life that really like you fell in love with movies, or that really, impacted you or stayed with you till now?
I mean, the very first film that I ever saw in a cinema was E.T.
Okay.
And I was 4 years old or something like that. And I mean, that's, one of the biggest blockbusters of all time, at this point. And I fell in love from there. A lot of the stuff that made me really want to write and research and seek out things were films that I found on VHS later on, when I was in high school, finding things like Santa Sangre, which is a Mexican film. It's exceptional and it's weird, and it was like I didn't know you could do that with movies. I didn't know movies could be weird, and that was something that was really formative for me. And then just in the discussion we're having right now, the first South Indian film that I saw in a theater was Entran on opening night, and being a part of that audience on opening night, when I'd never been to a South Indian film at all ever, was just transformative. It really changed the way that I thought about going to the cinema, because it was, it wasn't in Chennai, but it was a big deal. The crowd was rowdy. There was dancing, there was singing, there was chanting. It was like a rock concert, and I wanted that all the time. And so that's kind of why I fell into watching all of these films, all the South Indian films. Blockbusters are fun. But it's that communal experience that you don't really get at most films these days, apart from Marvel movies, and I'm just kind of over those.
Yeah, me too. I mean, my first film, I think I was taken to see The Jungle Book when I was very young, so they reissued it in the early 80s. But I think the first film that I can remember seeing was either Raiders of the Lost Ark or one of the early Indiana Jones movies. So I think, we are all sons of Spielberg, which sounds like some sort of creepy religious cult. But actually, we have been raised on this kind of spectacle from a very young age. And spectacle, when it's done right on the big screen, is something, truly something to behold and cheer. And I think actually one of the things that Triple R taps into is the kind of spectacle of old, which was tied to those serial movies that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg had watched growing up and loved. The narrative line is very simple. The goodies are the good guys, the baddies are the bad guys. There's very little sort of shading and ambiguity. You sort of know where you are all the time. But that's a great thing, because the amount of modern blockbusters that you go and see where that narrative line gets so tangled so quickly on, or so early on in the film, or is so reliant on events that have happened in 3 or 4 previous movies, Actually, to have a simple narrative line, I think there's something sort of really cheering and stirring about that, and I think that's what people are responding to about Triple I. It's that it's a very easy film to follow. You know who the good guys are. You know who the bad guys are. It plays because it's so simple on some level, and that's a very Spielbergian thing, I think.
Yeah. What about you, Manoj?
I have a very, very different answer. So growing up, for me, it was all the very old Malayalam movies that I grew up on. So movies like Narudikat, where that Mohanlal Srinivas sort of combo where they actually become police officers in the end. Like, so those were the movies that sort of stayed with me throughout. And it was not really the storylines, because as a kid you don't really care about the storyline. Those are the scenes and the sequences that really stay with you. But one movie, the first movie that really blew me apart and that really like changed my perspective at a very young age on movies was The Dark Knight. So I was just 10 years old when I saw The Dark Knight. I probably didn't even understand the whole movie, but there's a shot in the end where Batman sort of just goes away in his Batmobile. His cape is just flowing away, and then Gordon just looks at him and says, he's not the hero that we deserve or the one that we need right now. And they do this voiceover where they, connect a lot of sequences together. And as a kid, that just blew me away. I'm like, how is that possible? How did they even think about doing this? Even though now when you see it, you're like, oh, that's very normal. That's just a voiceover. Mm-hmm. It's how they write scripts. That's how they do it. But at that point in time as a kid, that just blew me away. So, I mean, for me, that was one movie, and that just made me a Christopher Nolan fan. So it was like being a Batman fan that actually made me a movie fan in a way. That sort of gave me that connection. And then after a few years, what really drew me back to South Indian cinema was actually a movie called Traffic. Again, that was also a Malayalam film. And it was about this, it was a very human story about them trying to transport a particular heart to a particular location through road to save a patient's life. And that just, I never knew that South Indian movies could do something like that. And to be honest, I was not exposed to many South Indian movies at that point of time. Like, I sort of closed myself off and just started focusing on the Nolan movies and everything like that. But that was the movie that brought me back. So I guess those are three movies that really sort of, shaped my sensibilities of movies.
All right. When Triple was announced that it's like a fictional tale about two real freedom fighters, my first thought went to Narnia. What if they, went to a fantasy world and explored, learned something, and then they came back and, started the freedom struggle. So I think Josh touched upon that, but what were your what was the first time you heard about it? And because you had seen Bahubali, Iga, and also you would have expectations, right? So what were the initial thoughts about the film?
Like I said, my first thoughts were that I was like, oh, this seems like it's going to be not a good fit for an international audience, just based on the story alone, because as you mentioned, it's based on the not the real lives, but two real people who existed and were very important to the freedom struggle in the 20s. And for me, that felt like it was not the universal appeal that something like Bahubali has, which is because it's fantasy and there's no connection, to reality there. And so that removes a barrier for foreign audiences. We don't have to understand the culture so much. We don't have to understand the religion so much. It's a fantasy. Like, fantasies from everywhere are fantasy. So it's easy to buy in. This seemed like it was going to be a tougher sell, but the way that it's executed, I was completely wrong. The characters are very well drawn. Like Mike said, it's a very simple story, which is another thing that's lacking, especially in a lot of South Indian masala movies or big flagship movies. Simplicity is not something they're good at. There's a tendency to want to throw all of the twists into the movie, and then within 20 minutes you're completely lost and just hoping that a fight breaks out so there's something to watch. Or a song. Yeah. So this morning, for example, KGF 2 comes out this week, and so I hadn't seen the first one since the opening night in the theater, so I watched KGF this morning, and I've already seen it and I still don't know what happens. I've seen it twice. There's so many things going on, so many characters. It's all in the dark. They all look the same. There's very little to discern one person from another in the story, because the bad guys look like the good guys. Everybody looks the same, and it was just like it's it's what an Indian audience might be used to, because a lot of the, going back to Bollywood in the 60s and 70s, they're all twisting and turning constantly. Even I just watched Saho a few nights ago or last night.
Oh, boy.
Again, there are about 15 too many twists in that movie. In order to try and keep track, there's 5 minutes of opening narrative monologue to try and explain what's going on, and they mentioned like 20 names and show 0 people's faces, and so you're trying to connect the dots the whole time. And what makes RRR so great is that it does away with all of that. It's very straightforward. There are these 2 characters. The structure, the way that it's structured with the 2 introduction, not just scenes, not just mass introduction scenes, but stories. You get the story of who Rama is, and then you get the story of who Bheem is before you get into the story of them together, which, allowing the audience time to spend with those characters alone that's genius. I mean, I was blown away by that.
It's very classical, isn't it? There's that whole Howard Hawks thing where you would define a character through action, and this is a perfect example of that. And it's something that the American cinema, I think, has kind of moved away from in recent times, because I don't think those big spectacles at the start of the Marvel movies necessarily define characters. They're just there to say, we're here to watch big screen action. Actually, to tie the character and the action is a skill, and it's a skill that I think has kind of been on the wane in the last 20, 30 years. So to see something that does it and does it so well, I think, from the off, I think I was sort of standing there going, okay, this is spectacle made by someone who knows what they're doing, which is not always the case nowadays. And as you said, those 2 extraordinary sequences at the start of the film, the sort of 1,000-man pylon outside the police headquarters, and then the tiger hunt as well. It is from the off defining the characters in terms of how, defining character by action. And I think that's a very classical thing that ties it back to Spielberg and previous generations as well.
It's it's like the opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like we find out who Indiana Jones through that opening sequence, who he is through that opening sequence, and it's a very similar thing here.
Yeah,
true. I think what Rajamouli does very well is, even though he manages so many characters, but he still presents very common, simple themes. It's always like good versus bad, done in a very simple way, so that even though it's very larger than life, even though it's probably this grand, complicated sequences, people all over the world can just connect to these characters. They can connect to the emotions. They can connect to a kid being taken away by someone else, and that struggle of getting them back. So I think it's very easily connectable. And even if you look at someone like Ram Charan's character, like how he sort of brings his backstory in the second half, he presents it in such a beautiful way that everyone can sort of connect at it very easily. So I think that's also like kudos to him for doing that.
I was going to say, it is a skill to have a vision, as Rajamouli clearly does with his films, but also not to lose track of the detail, and to do the big picture and the small picture simultaneously is something that I don't think many big action directors do, or certainly not do very well. Yeah. There's either that sense that people will get so caught up in the world building that they forget to move the story on, or they get so tied down by nerdy detail that it actually forgets to tell a story that's worth telling at all. So to have a director who can do those big spectacle things, but also knows how to tie them to characters and to do all the fire and water stuff and to bring that in and to make it coherent. That's the thing that I think audiences are responding to. It is a big action-packed blockbuster that is coherent and tells a story coherently. And that's why people are standing up and cheering and going wild for it.
Yeah. There's a question from the chat. What do you think about Rajamouli directing a Marvel movie? He has given his own answer, but I would like to hear from you guys.
Because every director now has to answer this question. Are you going to do a Marvel movie? The first question that every director has to do. Josh, what were you going to say?
Oh, it's I've seen his answer because I saw that question posed to him last week. I don't think that's a great idea. It's actually one of the things that makes me the most sad about the modern blockbuster cycle and the Marvel cycle is that it keeps pulling away these very talented directors and filmmakers from making the stuff that they're so good at. And some of them are able to do it well and turn these films into their own works. James Gunn with the Suicide Squad and the Guardians of the Galaxy films has done a great job. I love his own independent stuff. Taika Waititi, I hope that he sort of comes back to us in the real world outside of the Marvel universe soon, because he's a great director even in his earlier films. I would hate to see Rajamouli roped into that system for one big reason, and that is that in the industry that he is a part of, Rajamouli calls the shots. He's not producers, he's not taking note. The films are his visions, and that clearly shines through. Whereas if he were to do it in an American style studio system, which they don't really have in the Telugu film industry, he would be constantly trying to make a million people happy. And right now he's just trying to make himself happy. And I think it's working out, obviously.
Yeah.
And he would have to fit the Nick Fury cameo somewhere.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I completely agree. I think it is a very sad thing. 20 years ago, when a big overseas international director had a big hit, the first question they would ask was, "Oh, are you going to do something in the English language? Are you going to do something in Hollywood?" And now we've narrowed it down to, "Are you going to make this specific type of film in Hollywood?" Everything's getting so narrow, and I think. Yeah, I mean, he clearly has his own idiosyncratic way of doing things. However much he's inspired by outside influences, he always brings his own personal touch to stuff. And I think that is one of the things that, I mean, we saw with the Chloe Zhao movie Eternals, what she did. But sometimes when a director brings their own personal idiosyncratic stuff to material, it not only is not really a personal film, it also doesn't really work as a Marvel movie. It's sort of in this weird halfway house. So, I mean, there were so many reasons why he should just, I hope he carries on sort of ploughing his own furrow. And clearly there's an audience for his stuff. He doesn't need Marvel. He doesn't need the DC universe or whatever. He can carry on doing his own stuff. And those, his movies are taking huge amounts of money. So, I just hope he carries on doing his own thing.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a little bit like how when John Woo was brought in to do Mission Impossible 2, where, it's still fun to watch. But it's lacking in terms of the story, but it's still fun to watch. It's fun to watch Tom Cruise running and dogs all flying in the air and him like doing the shootout. It's fun to watch, but somewhere that he's not fully happy with what he's directing. I think, but Rajamouli, I think if he does like maybe a one-off, like a what if kind of a story. I know that's never going to happen, but where he has a freedom to just go berserk and just have fun with the story, then that might work, maybe. But like the DC universe is a bit more. How should I say it? Not at all connected in many ways, so they're just doing whatever.
Anything goes in DC.
Yeah, so like maybe like a Dr. Fate adventure story if Rajamouli does, but the chance of that are very slim of it working out. But I know that's the only way I can see it working.
Yeah, I don't. The Marvel thing, I think that's a no-go. But you mentioned Mission Impossible 2, that sort of struck something with me because John Woo is a very unique filmmaker, and Mission Impossible 2, not his greatest success, but he was able to take his particular set of skills and his particular vision and transpose it to the US with much more entertaining films like Hard Target or Face Off. I think if in a million years Rajamouli were to make a film in the English language, I think that would be the more preferred route. Would be, this is a crazy idea that I have, I'm just going to have to change it a little bit, and I think that's kind of what those films do, is they take what John Woo was good at and they use different actors, set it in a different culture, but without constraining it to a mythos that he then is now bound to follow, as you were saying, 15 other movies and those character traits in order to tell his story, because that's not going to work, I don't think.
Yeah.
He has too strong.
Bharat Rangan mentioned in his review that the film doesn't, go to the mass way to fulfill the wishes of the fans of these stars. It's not. He doesn't care about the star image. He cares about the character image, and I think that's why the film really does well. Even the introduction scene, it's not Ram Charan's introduction scene. It's that character's introduction scene, and it sets up the motivation, what he's doing, what he's trying to do, and both the even Junior NTR scene, right? He's trying to get the wolf, but a tiger shows up, and it's not like, oh, I'm a hero, I can do anything, So I think that, and these are the things that make it stand out of the crowd we have with so many mass masala films with big actors doing it, because it again becomes about the actor, not the character. And I think that's where the distinction lies in. And I think the chat is also having a lot of discussion about this, and this is one of the criticism, right? Like, of course there will be people who don't like the film, and sometimes the criticism doesn't, I don't get it, but okay, it's like, oh, it's just over the top, it makes no sense, the story is bad, makes all these logical issues and everything. But like, I think in India people are more used to that kind of film, so they are forgiving of things like that. The famous Angry Birds scene in Bahubali 2. I was very forgiving of it, but knowing that international audience are enjoying it more, how do you take that criticism?
I'll give you an anecdote. When I went to see it on the Monday afternoon after it opened, and this is the first time this has ever happened to me. So I went to see it. I went to a public screening at a multiplex just up the road from me in Birmingham, and it was the first time I'd paid to see an Indian film, and I wasn't the only white person in the room. There were other white people who had obviously read the reviews or because it had been covered in various places, and there were a group of middle-aged men who were seeing it, and they were sitting sort of down and to the right from me. So I was sitting slightly further back, and they were in the front row. And as is always this, because it wasn't a huge crowd, in the intermission or interval, as we're now obliged to call it, they were having a conversation amongst themselves. And because there were very few people in the room, inevitably that conversation sort of traveled and everyone ended up hearing it. And it was clear that they'd come to the film because they were history buffs, and they thought it was going to be like a proper sort of historical biopic, and they were like, I think they're having fun. It was clear that they were having a good time, but it was not the sort of history lesson that they had been led to expect, I think. And so but they went along with it. They stuck around, and they were enjoying it clearly. I think the best films always teach you how to watch them, and I think in those two early set piece sequences in the first 10, 15, 20 minutes let you know this is not going to be The Jewel in the Crown or Gandhi, or it's not going to be a sort of prestige period piece. It is going to be sort of looser. It's playing harder and faster with the truth, and the characters are sort of exaggerations of real life figures rather than actual detailed character studies, if you like. So it's telling you from the off that this is going. We're going to have some fun here. We're not here. This is not a history lesson. This is not we're not in school. We're in a cinema. And I think it clearly the guys who came expecting History 101 were slightly thrown by it, but they were enjoying the ride all the same. So I think it is one of those things. If you go in with an open mind, then you should have no issue with it whatsoever. But it certainly does sort of go over the top and then go over the top again and then finds another top to go over after that. That's the extraordinary thing about it. It keeps going over the top. There is no limit to its top. It's remarkable.
And one of the things that I've noticed about criticisms of the film, this is a terrible thing to do, but I am my reviews do report to Rotten Tomatoes, and so once in a while I'll just go check and see how a film that I liked is doing, or a film that I hated is doing, just, out of curiosity. And having done that with the first week with this film, the last time I checked, there were 3 negative reviews, all of which were from Indian critics writing for Indian outlets. And they were complaining about the exact thing that we are loving about it, is that it is going over the top, and that it doesn't make sense, or that it's bloated, which I think, amazingly, for this film, it's 3 hours and 8 minutes long. I didn't feel bloat at all. Like it charges through to the end. And I've also seen the same sort of criticisms that were laid at the feet of Bahubali about depictions of Hindu deities and the caste system and all these other sort of complicated things that, frankly, I don't get. It's not that I haven't tried, because I have, but they are very complicated. And unless you're raised in a culture where those things are your daily reality, it's a very difficult thing to understand the nuance of. And I think that's part of the reason that those concerns never come up when it comes to Western critics or Western viewers going to see these films, is that that's not a barrier. You know, there are those little things that might irk a person in a certain community in India, but just would go straight over our heads, which is a blessing in a lot of cases, because it allows me to focus more on the story that's told, and not trying. And so many people are trying to link, you know, the real world freedom fighters with the characters on the screen, and I think that's a fool's game also, because, you know, the guy fights a tiger with his bare hands in the first 10 minutes of the movie. What are you going to do? You know, that's not the guy. So it's just a matter of, as Mike said, are you going to let the movie tell you what it is, or are you going to come to the film and say, like those guys that were in his screening with him, this is a historical epic. Why are they piggyback fighting with double shotguns? You know, or what's happening?
Yeah,
I think I do agree with that, because I think with Rajamouli films, it's more about the experience of watching. It's not really the film as it is. The experience of watching it sort of exceeds the film direction, or the film sort of what it is. Because if you try to go with the film, like if you try to view it as any other film, I don't think you'll really enjoy it. But if you just go all in and just try to experience what he's trying to do, only then you'll have fun. So I think that's kind of how I always view Rajamouli films.
you know what really saddens me is that, like, listening to all, because everyone have their own opinions, they don't like it, I understand, they have their own viewpoints. But when I hear like that, you have to keep your brain outside to watch this film, it's just a popcorn entertainer, it's a one-time watch, it saddens me, because I think you didn't get it, or you don't want to see it, because this is cinema. You cannot disregard it as just a popcorn entertainer. There's so much has gone, just like, you know, the things which go behind making a Godfather, same things in a different way have gone behind this film. You know, I can just I've seen this 3 times, and even the 3rd time I was finding new details.
Every
Things,
frame has
you
a lot
know,
of thought
how
behind it.
everything is paid off by the end. Everything has, you know, it's all in a circle. It's not anything is happening at any moment. You know, so when I hear these criticisms, I don't want to go and correct them on, you know, you are wrong, I am right. But I just want to share with people why I think it's really great. It is also cinema. So I think it feels really, you know, that why are they not, you know, seeing that? Come on, you know, it's there.
Yeah.
I will say this, by and large, anyone who says, you know, leave your brain at the door has not seen enough properly dumb action movies. Because I think if you're a critic, you know, I spent 20 years watching very, very dumb action movies, and this is not a very dumb action movie, because there's a great sort of intelligence and craft and care with the way everything is assembled. You know, in all those set pieces, you know exactly where the characters are at any given point. That kind of spatial coherence you don't get in the majority of American action movies nowadays, because everything is just throw the camera around, chop it to pieces, and so you lose that spatial continuity and that sense of where exactly the characters are. And I think one of the great pleasures of this film is watching action done with a degree of skill and craft that, you know, and it is one of the reasons why audiences are flocking to it, because they are seeing something that has been put together with proper love and intelligence and care. And I don't think you get that from the majority of the Marvel and DC movies. You know, we have to sort of define everything nowadays by Marvel and DC, and it gets so tiresome. But, you know, there's a Michael Bay movie out this weekend, Ambulance.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm sure even compared, you know, Michael Bay with all the vast resources at his disposal would look at that mid-film raid on the governor's mansion in Triple R and go, you know what, I really wish I'd put that together. You know, the bit where the tigers come out the cages, that's cinema, you know, it's really thrilling. It connects fundamentally with something that we're always looking for whenever we go and sit in the dark for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, it's kind of funny that the second unit director, Michael Bay's second unit director, worked on Triple R.
Oh.
So,
Wow.
no, it wasn't that one. It was a different one. No, sorry, that was misspoken. He did something really careful that I watched. But yeah, I think you're right. If we go back to Michael Bay, looking at the Transformers movies, just as an example, of a silly sort of science fiction action, I never know what's happening in any of those action sequences. It's just like loud noises and weird digital shapes, and nothing really makes sense. And it's not, for me, it's not that it doesn't make sense, but I'm okay with it because it's fun to watch. It's not fun to watch. It's very confusing. These films, there's nothing confusing about RRR. You know exactly what every character's motivation is at all times. You know who the good guy is and the bad guy is, like Mike was saying. That pre-interval sequence is just incredible. And it pays off so many things that are happening throughout the film. From the very beginning of the film. And that's wonderful. You know, having seen it 3 times now, I still get excited when the tigers and the deer and all those things jump out. That's amazing. Like, who thinks of that? Oh, it's the guy that made a reincarnated fly flip a car. That guy thought that. And so he has this kind of imagination, and now he has the ability and the resources to pull off his wildest dreams, and he does it so well. Like, it's amazing to see what he's.
Yeah, you know, I think the first time I was just too overwhelmed to process the film really well. But the third time when I saw it, right, it just hit me differently, because suddenly I realized this is my childhood. You know, I saw Rajamouli, you know, talking about, he thinks, right, in Mahabharata, what if these two characters met? In history, what if this? And while growing, I also imagined these things. But this guy has put it on screen, you know. Like, just take a scene, right? Like, there's, of course, Mahabharata and Ramayana parallels and influences. But he has actually flipped it. You know, he has, because in Ramayana, Ram sends Hanuman to Sita with his, ring, wedding ring. So Sita knows it's from Ram. And to save Sita from, exile, or not exile, like she's captive there. And here it's opposite, because Sita is sending Bheem or Hanuman in this case to get Ram out, and he's sending that necklace thing, which is part of that, you know. So he's just imagining these things and put it all together as one, and it's still being so coherent, you know. It's just outstanding. And coming back to that, knowing that both these real life personalities, right, freedom fighters, even for me, you know, being a North Indian, I didn't know about them, because we have been only taught about the people who were in the mainstream while fighting for, you know, freedom struggle. True. And for me also, it was, you know, enlightening in that sense also. So I think in a way it worked, because the film is actually, the most number of people who are watching the film don't really know about them. So he doesn't have to rely on people knowing about them at all. I think it works in the favor for the film.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah, it's much easier to buy them in this film than it is to, say, buy Abraham Lincoln as a vampire hunter. But I think the same applies. He's having fun with, with historical figures, and I'm sure that, Rajamouli, not to put words in his mouth, but I'm sure he would say something along the lines of, if my film has encouraged you to go out and read a history book on these people and see what they actually did, because doubtless they were less hunky than they are in the film. They danced, they weren't great dancers possibly in real life, who knows? But if he's inspired you, if he's engaged you, to go out and read about them, that's the film. So I'd much rather a film do that, send me out to go and buy a history book and read a history book, than to actually sit there and read a history book to me for 2.5 hours. Because we see so many sort of prestige movies that are sort of so bound by history or by past texts or whatever, to actually see something that sort of rips it from the page and throws it up big on a screen is something to behold.
And one of the things that, going off on along with that, is that it does free it from criticism in certain ways. It's not bound to those actual historical, actual historical people. Characters in the film aren't bound by that reality, which does allow Rajamouli a lot more room to play, also room to build big spectacle, and all that sort of thing that he does well. And I'm all for giving him whatever stand he
It's actually like a origin story for both of them, because I think if you straight back the credits, you see some extra scenes, them arriving back to their villages. So the avatar they are in, that's what their avatar was in, in history, if you read about them. So it was like a cool idea, it's like just your freedom fighters, you made them into, these beings, and you are watching them, kick ass. It's so fun. And for us, I think most Indians, the enemies, it's very simple. If you make the Britishers the enemy,
Yeah, it's
I would use the word colonizers, not Britishers. So I think it's
Most countries in the world.
but actually, I think from there we can go to the white actors in the film. Go on.
Well, so I mean, we've been talking about Spielberg, so the link, and I only realised this when Josh flashed a picture up on of the actress in question on Twitter. Alison Doody is playing the governor's wife, and Alison Doody is, I think, the love interest in the third Indiana Jones movie.
Yeah.
Is that correct, Josh? Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, the link is kind of there. I think Rajamouli is somehow aware of this. I think that's a bit of knowing casting. Ray Stevenson, I thought, was quite good as the governor, because he does what Ray Stevenson does. He turns up and he's bulky and he's thuggish, and he's the kind of hissable villain you need. I think some of the other English performers, I always have this issue with English actors in Indian films, that it often seems like they have been sort of deprogrammed to speak English in a very particular way, which just sounds wrong to my ears. And God knows the many horrors that Britain inflicted on India during the colonial years. It's only right that India gets some payback. But deprogramming our actors to speak the Queen's English in this strange sort of stuttering, hesitant way, and I'm sure overdubbing has something to do with it as well. It always strikes the ear a little bit off. But they're bad guys, it's okay if they're a little bit cardboardish and a little bit wooden. That's all kind of part of the fun, I think. So,
I mean, my impression of that has been, because this is not news. Whenever there are white actors in a lot of these popular films, the acting performances always seem kind of off, and in some cases it's because they just hired whoever was around. Rajamouli does not do that; he can hire professionals. And this is completely just my observation. What I kind of think the idea is that have these characters perform in this specific way with this particular delivery of their line. I think it's more to do with making the English more understandable globally. Because if they were to go into like full accents, speaking normally at a regular pace, it might be a little bit harder to keep up with for people who aren't as comfortable in English. Colloquialisms and idioms and things being taken out does make it a little bit more clear. It's the same, if we watch a movie over here with Nazi characters, I mean, they're all going to talk like weird stereotypes of. So it's the same kind of concession that I think is being made with a lot of Indian films that feature white performers. Like you said, I think Ray Stevenson probably comes off best, and Jenny also comes off pretty well. She's an character; she feels like a real well-rounded part of the film, more so than some of the other characters do. But yeah, I think that is direction. I don't think that's poor performances. That's definitely what Rajamouli is going for in these particular performances.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's also overdone.
Actually,
that's very interesting. So, is there any Indian movie where you feel like the white actors, as you say, like performed well in a way that didn't throw you off, like
Lagan?
Any Indian movie?
Well, straight I watched Lagan on Friday night because this sort of led me back to it, and I was, it has a really quite good performance by Paul Blackthorne. He went on and did other things. I think he was the villain in 24, a couple of seasons, down the road.
He was an actor.
And he speaks Hindi in that as well. So he's not only speaking English with some level of basic comprehension, which I appreciated. He's speaking Hindi as well. So I think. It's an odd one. I still don't understand it. However many years of watching Indian films, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think broadly the English performance in Lagan are actually really good.
That would have been my suggestion.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I think in my I saw the Hindi one, and they were at some moments they were over dubbing in Hindi what they are saying, and sometimes they weren't doing that. And I was wondering, maybe the English is different because they want more people to understand it clearly. Because I think even sometimes I don't understand. While I think recently I was watching Moon Knight, and the accent is so different. I had to have subtitles to really understand. So but as Josh said, right? Like I also feel like it's by design. The writing is in a way that makes them look really, not that, like, it's like really one tone, and it makes it easier to make them the villains, and you don't have to spend time making them, building them up, because we all know they are the villains, so it's no wasting time. Instead, spend time on building their friendship, so I think that's there. But let's come to some of our favorite scenes from the film, and before that, some scenes which you didn't like, or you thought they could have been better, or something like that.
I was sold the whole time. You're not going to get any. I was for the long run. This thing just it worked for me so well the whole time. So I couldn't. Terrible. I'm a critic. I should be able to criticize. But
your enthusiasm is great. It's good to have someone who's all in for something. I had slight reservations about Alia. I think she doesn't really have very much to do other than stand around in a field in a sari looking pretty.
I have a question for you. Do you think Gangubai came before this and she really became a star and you were expecting more? That's why?
This may well have been. This was supposed to open before Gangubai, and then it got postponed, and now it's sort of. And Gangubai did kind of blow me away and sweep me up in a way that this has swept up Josh. I am all in for Gangubai, and I think that is such a sort of complete role for an actress, and she nails it so brilliantly that to then see a film which is just essentially using her as set dressing, or as jewelry or an accessory, something like that, to the main plot. Did feel a little bit disappointing, but it could well have been just running, the way that the release schedule has worked out. But I sometimes felt it was a little bit too bromantic. I have limitations on how much bromance I can sort of get into and commit to. This kind of felt a bit exhaustingly bromantic in a way that I never felt that Bahubali actually did. I think Bahubali, because the main characters are male and female, you get that kind of balance in its great moments. Overall, I'm not. I was going to ask you guys, where do you think this measures up against Bahubali? Because for me, I'm sort of wrestling with the idea that Bahubali is something that was sort of built to last, and because it's in two parts and it came at us in sort of one film 1 year and then another 2 years later we got the conclusion, that has kind of stayed with me in a way that this, which I only saw 3 weeks ago, is kind of fading from the memory. It does feel like a film that was sort of custom made for the opening weekend and perhaps even the first show, and to deliver absolutely that first weekend. I mean, you guys have seen it more than I have. How does it sort of stack up against Bahubali for you?
Who wants to take that?
See, I think Bahubali 1's ending, the cliffhanger ending, that just resonated with everyone in the country, where everyone had that same question in their mind, like what just happened? Like, why did he kill him? Like, I think that just resonates so strongly with everyone, and I can't think of any other cliffhanger movie in India that had the same impact. Where the part one ended in such, and the makers were so confident that they would. This would actually resonate with everyone, and
they were not so confident, but okay.
Yeah, but still, like the audience doesn't know that, right? When watching it, the audience doesn't. All right, we are in for the second one now. So,
but
I think just
do we have a movie with cliffhangers in India?
That's what I'm saying. Like, I can't think of anything that had a cliffhanger in that extent, which resonated with everyone across the country.
Like, I think KGF, if it's not a cliffhanger, but
yeah, but.
Fir Hera Fairy had a cliffhanger and they never made a next movie.
That's another thing about those two films is it is such a cohesive vision, and there's been this pattern of Indian films calling themselves Part 1 and then just nothing ever happens again. Yeah. There's I haven't seen it yet, but Attack also says it's which I want to see Attack. It sounds like fun.
It is.
Pushpa, Pushpa. That's another one that kind of got will most likely be concluded, but none of them had the impact like
True.
on, like you said, on the Indian psyche, on the film going public, that, you know, why did
And this one did it first, so
It became a meme.
yeah, it became. So I think just because of that, you know, it just resonated with everyone strongly, that it stayed in everyone's memory. You know, people went back, rewatched the first one, and as we the second one. I think there were even theaters that re-released the first one as the second one came close to the release date. So just because of that, I think it stayed with people's hearts a lot more, and it created that Rajamouli brand in a way which, you know, really acted well for the goodwill of this movie as well. Like, you know, instantly when the trailers came, everyone were like anticipating this to be one of the best movies of the year. So I don't think, like, when I first finished watching it, I think I even told Nona that I think I maybe like it more than Bahubali. But now when I think more about it, I feel like, no, I think Bahubali just had a much stronger impact than this. But this is pretty close. That's what I think.
I think,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I think it's very difficult for me to choose, having, you know, been a Rajamouli fan for the last many years at this point. I did see both Bahubalis at least 3 times in the cinema, and then they had, you know, 100-day celebrations. I went back for that. You know, all of those films I really love. This one, I feel like is hitting a chord more with the general audience out here, that's adventurous. You know, the adventurous audience, and I think it's a good example of when a filmmaker uses his past success and builds on it, you know, because even if you look at the numbers between the first, not that I hate numbers, but if you look at the numbers between the first Bahubali and the second one, it's a tremendous, massive difference.
Yeah.
Which is kind of odd, considering you can't really know what's going on in the second one unless you know the first one. But that came on with a lot of the streaming services and things like that.
I have a confession to make.
You saw 2 first, didn't you?
No,
Okay.
So when the first movie came out, I was in school, so, you know, I didn't have the privilege to go to the theater and watch the film. And in that time, it was not a thing to watch a South Indian film dubbed in Hindi. It was not a thing, and I watched a cam recording version on my phone. So, but I saw Bahubali 2 5 times in theaters, and then Triple R, of course, I've seen 3 times. So I'm trying to, you know, fill in for that. But yeah, I think Bahubali 2 was just proportions for just.
But the cam version had all the cheering and everything.
I think it was only the second half. Then I think I watched it again, like the whole thing when it was on TV or something. But talking about the scenes in the film, I think I would say Bahubali and Triple R. I would say Bahubali 2 is just too close to my heart. I'm biased towards it, but I feel that Triple R is a better technical film, and overall, you know, as a package, it's better than any other film he has done in the past. So I think in that aspect, Triple R is superior, but Bahubali 2 is just too close to my heart, so I'm just biased.
Yeah, it's like trying to choose your favorite child, and you know, it's very difficult to do. You mentioned earlier the ridiculousness of the Angry Bird scene in Bahubali 2, and that's one of my favorite things I've ever seen in the cinema. I stood up and cheered every time I saw that scene. I did it. We rewatched the 2 movies after the first time we saw Triple R here at home, and I still stood up and cheered in my room. And I love that sequence. I think it's amazing. And that's actually when a little bit of backstory. I first saw a Rajamouli film when I saw Magadhir in 2010 on home video. I didn't see it in the theater, but I did see Iga in the theater. And I was mentioning to you guys before we went on that when I saw Iga, it had no subtitles and in the theater. And I saw it twice, actually, because it's a very easy film to follow. And I ended up programming it at several film festivals. And it's just having been a part of seeing like where this filmmaker is going, because if you look at that film, it's kind of the beginning of Rajamouli going away from the mass films. You know, his early films are still really great and they made a ton of money, but they are very star-centered. But you know, with Magadhir, where it was Ram Charan's first film, he's Chiranjeevi's kid, so he's going to have an audience no matter what. But bringing in Nani and Samantha for Iga, and then bringing back Sunil for Mariana Ramana, and then Prabhas is a big star. I mean, he was a big star when Bahubali came out. But by that point, with just those two films, he took himself out of that mass conversation and said, "I'm making, prop and masala films. These are prop and masala films."
Yeah.
And I've always really appreciated that he doesn't need a big name to make these kind of movies. Now at this point, these aren't Ram Charan and Junior NTR movie. It's not their movie.
Yeah.
Rajamouli's movie that they're working in, which I think is speaks to him and what he's been able to do.
Yeah.
It is a rare case of a director being a bigger name than his stars in the in Indian cinema, as we know. It's very rare. It's usually the star has all the power on the set, and that's why everything gets configured in a certain way. This does look to me like a case where the director had all the control and all the power, and actually directed those stars into giving proper performances.
Yeah. I would like to share something. Recently, my grandfather passed away, and he was bedridden, and he never used to come out, and we used to force him. And one day I got him, and I just started Bahubali, and he stood there, stayed there half an hour. He's like, okay, now I have to go back. And every day he used to come, sit for half an hour, watch the film, and go back. So when Bahubali 1 ended, I used to just tease him. Katappa, why did he kill him? Why did he kill him? And he used to get angry. No, I'll watch it later. Not now. And I'm just so happy that I could show both the films to him before he left. But that I feel happy that I did that. And moving on to favorite scenes in the film. Of course, I think the interval, the tiger shot is just, and I just love that. First time watching that scene, I didn't even realize. And then it started me, oh my god, that's what he was doing in the jungle. And then, the meat he was carrying, that was all about. And, it just, I never, it's, as you said, right? You don't think about this, that you can do that.
Well, again, that's another sort of refutation of the whole idea that you need to leave your brain at the door. Actually, if you think about it, it gets stronger and stronger in the mind because everything sort of fits together in a way that I don't think a lot of blockbusters, it's nuts and bolts that are thrown up on the screen and it doesn't matter where they land. Here, everything does find a hole, it's like everything goes together rather brilliantly. I mean, for me, Man vs. Tiger is obviously going to be up there among my favorite because how often do you get to see that in a movie, outside the Jumanji franchise? So that for me was a highlight. I think actually I quite like the bit on the bridge where the train derails and they're signaling to one another. And before they've even sort of met, they're communicating, but with hands and with gestures and whatever. And again, it sort of goes to the idea that he is such a visual filmmaker. He doesn't need any dialogue to set anything up. You understand immediately what's going on. And I think I said in the review, it's almost like you're watching the characters direct the action within their own movie, which is one of the reasons why where everyone is and where everyone is headed and what they're going to do there. To have that extra sort of low level of direction going on within the actual frame is incredible.
Yeah, those two sequences are great. Natu of course is, another thing about why this film works so well is, a lot of American audiences are averse to musicals. It's just not a part of our culture very much. We have our West Side Story and things like that. Once a year we'll let one slide. But if you talk to people who are film fans but have avoided Indian cinema, it is largely, that's one of the big points that throws people off, is why are people just breaking out into song? That's, and I love it, but not everybody does. And in this particular case, also not unlike most other Telugu masala films, it is plot centered. This song has a purpose. The lyrics of the song have a purpose. The dance moves have a purpose. Everything is intentional. It's not like all of a sudden they jetted off to Switzerland and started dancing inside of on some mountain.
I know what you're referring to.
which they do a lot. Or all of a sudden they're in Barcelona for some reason, and you're like, why we were in Hyderabad a minute ago, and now we're in Barcelona dancing in front of it. What's happening right? And a lot of my friends who are film fans and went and saw this movie kind of because I built it up over the years with helping to encourage them to see Bahubali and Eid and other things like that. They love that sequence because what's not to love about that sequence? It's a dance battle to the death against British imperialists. They're showing their superiority, their physical stamina, and it does, it plays a very important part in the plot. And it's great. And the other songs as well, Komaram Bheem is also a wonderful song that makes sense in the context of the film. All of the song that the little girl sings at the beginning then becomes the song that he sings back to her later on. Like all of these things, the music is really wonderful. Now, some of the themes, like the background score themes, they felt like they came from Bahubali because it's more Kiravani, so it does sound like Kiravani in some places. But those sequences are wonderful. Natu in particular is great.
And then Nacha beat comes back later because when he's poisoned, he uses the same beat. And when Bheem goes to rescue him, he uses the same beat. So it's just outstanding.
It is.
It all fits together. I told you. It all fits. It's not just thrown up on the screen. He's thinking about this stuff. Yeah. And Natu would work perfectly well if you took it out of the film and showed it as a short film, because there's an inbuilt narrative tension. It's an action sequence set to song. That's what's so great about it. It works on several levels, multiple levels simultaneously. So you could take that sequence out and show it to anyone, and they would be kind of blown away by it, I think.
Yeah.
Sure. I think any scene with the bike and the hose, the combination of that was just amazing to watch. Like, I had chills. Like, I think they did that 3 or 4 times, where and in very important places in the narrative, especially in the end, when they again bring it back and they sort of ride to the palace sort of thing, and I think that was great. Like, for me, I loved those scenes.
I thought it was interesting how they utilized those sequences, in the first, the Dosti song, where they're first sort of getting together. You would expect it to be the other way around because, Bheem is the tribal, and at this point, Rama is the more cityfied sort of urban character, even though he's also from from a rural area. And the fact they switch it around like that, I thought was very interesting.
Yeah. And I think even the horse and motorcycle, right? They build it so organically, like, he got a horse, he got a bike, and they have to go on the bridge, and then you keep that coming throughout the film. It's just amazing. Coming to the introduction scenes of both the characters, I think for Ram Charan scene, what really blew me away was, of course, the crowd, the way they pulled it off, but they were dragging him. They were pulling him up, and I've never seen a mainstream hero being in a big commercial film that's happening to him on screen. And, and even then, even he was pushing everyone and hitting them. It was never, you don't feel great he's hitting them. It's the way it's like, when he's pushing through that, like a cliff, and they're falling, and these are close-ups of them getting hurt. And you feel for them because these are people fighting for the country, So I think these things, you understand, you actually root against him. And I think there was on Twitter, someone posted a video of a kid, and he was crying at the interval because he thought his favorite is Ram Charan, and they made him a villain. And he was just crying, how can they do this? And
but they built him up to be a villain throughout till the interval point.
Yeah, I think there are a few glimpses of Ajay and Alia. Like, we know, something is going on. It's not, we don't know the complete picture.
True.
Yeah. But what do you guys think of that scene? Also, I said Rajamouli is a big fan of Game of Thrones, so I see where the inspirations come from.
But yeah, I think what you were saying is correct as well, as far as you don't see a whole lot of those big stars being dragged around and bloodied in that way by the end of the sequence. And a bad guy, he is, like you were saying, he is fighting against these freedom fighters, and he's the star of the film. He's going to be a hero at some point, but you're still kind of confused seeing that first part. Like, he doesn't look like a good guy.
Yeah.
And it is, in that sequence at least, we understand that he is very, very strong, but we also understand that he is vulnerable because he does get. So it's not quite, later on they throw physics out the window when they're throwing bikes around and punching tigers in the face and all those sort of things. But it is sort of set up that he is a character who has an unusual strength, but then can also be hurt, which comes back again later when he gets bit by a snake, and then when his legs get hurt in prison, like all of those things, they lend the character a vulnerability that people like Ram Charan don't usually see in a film.
Yeah.
I think it also sets up the fact that when he's set on a goal, he won't ever quit.
Yeah.
I think that was an important character they set up right away. Like you could see his determination in his eyes that he will bring that person here.
He is
So I
like
think
fire.
Yeah.
Who has a fixed task and it will complete it.
Keeps on burning.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I think because that is the first big action scene. I mean, there is a case in which that develops its own rhythms and its own momentum, and you think it's just going to be him going to the crowd, and then there'll be a small sort of tussle or whatever. But that tussle gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it, until the point where it's like a waterfall or a human avalanche of people flowing down on top of him. So again, this whole idea of a film teaching you how to watch it. This is a film that will come at you in waves. You think that it's reached a climax, but actually no, it's still to come. And I think it's very smartly put together. And also it was just so good to see an action sequence where the crowds weren't entirely. I'm sure there was a degree of digital effects work and computer animation and things like that to bulk out the crowd, but every single beat of that action sequence felt physical. It felt lived through. It felt like you were in the middle of this giant torrent of angry people punching and pummeling. It's a great way to open a film, I think, because it really does sort of pick you up by the collar and throw you around for about 10 minutes, and you come out looking almost as rough as the character does, I think.
Yeah, and if you when you watch the film again and knowing what his character's motivation is, there's a scene where he doesn't get promoted, and he looks at the building where the arms is, and in the second watching, what he's behind. It's like not he's not trying in the film, not trying to hide that he's a good guy, but I'm making him bad. No, if you know what he's trying to do, you understand. That no point is framing him as a villain. So I think it's like it's honest. They're not trying to be over smart and throw us off and give us a twist. So I think that's pretty interesting. Coming to Bheem's introduction, I love the fact that he's trying to get a wolf and the tiger shows up and he's so scared. He's like, oh shit, run. Again, you don't see that. You don't see a hero getting scared of like a task in hand. And then even like when the tiger's down, him picking up and saying sorry and I'm using you, and it just show it, as you said right in the beginning, that these scenes define the characters. Like he is strong, but he's so innocent. He's so pure.
Yeah, nothing is gratuitous. Everything sort of ties into something, and there's a degree of strategy in that whole tiger hunt thing, which again you don't get in most blockbusters. The action is just sort of big, and there's a big explosion. There are little after effects and things like that, but there's a degree of how do we get from here to there, and you can tell someone's really thought that whole sequence through. Till we get to the point where it's man and tiger up against one another, baring their teeth and growling at one another, which is extraordinary. But yeah, no. All those sequences have been thought through at every single step. There is a progression there. It's not just sudden outpouring of action that doesn't really relate to anything, but just wakes everyone up for 20 minutes and then we go back to narrative. It is, how does this come out of the narrative? What does this tell us about the characters? And so 2 hours down the line, where all those things have been paid off, you do feel like you've had a proper sort of a proper night out, a complete night out. And I think this is what people are discovering. Even this week, the number of show times here in the UK has come down because it's Easter holidays and Morbius has come into cinemas and swallowed up. And everyone agrees that Morbius is junk and we should go nowhere near it. But it is playing on many more screens now than Triple R. But people are discovering it. And all this week on Twitter, friends people I follow, people who follow me, they've been talking about it in a way that I don't think people have been talking about the other big Indian films at the moment. They've probably been sharing how much they loved it and just the experience of being back in a cinema, which we haven't had for 2 years, and seeing a film that's actually worth seeing on the big screen. We've been deprived a lot of that in recent times, so it's only right that we get something nice that happens every now and again.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys get emotional or cry watching movies, but I don't cry. I don't know why. I want to, but I don't. But I think the scene that came close to making me really teared eye was when in the back flashback when Ajay Devgn's wife dies and the son wants to go there and he says load, and you have to continue working. And I think it's not the imagery at the moment, it's the thought that how many people have gone through it, losing your loved one but still being on your task because what you're fighting for is greater than anything else. And I think that's what hit me for. What about you guys? Any scenes that touched you?
I mean, I feel that's a very appropriate place to, if you're gonna leak from your eyes a little bit, I think that's a pretty good one. I mentioned this earlier. Mike said that he saw my post about Alison Doody. And the other thing that I posted at the same time was about seeing Shriya Saran in a film, which she hasn't really had much to do in a while. And it was nice to see her. She got shot, but it was nice to see her. And that I've seen the film 3 times now, and every time it kind of makes me well up a little bit. That sequence where he's, like you said, the task at hand is more important, and the world doesn't stop just because, everyone has been through that. You just mentioned losing your grandfather. We've all been through a point where we've lost something or someone, and it feels like the world should just stop. Like, why is everything still happening? Yeah. And acknowledging that in the film in this way was really touching.
Yeah, I agree. I think that is the closest film. I think a couple of people have picked up on the fact that there isn't a huge amount of emotional depth in the film. It sort of exists on a straight line and it doesn't go too far underneath that. But I think that those flashbacks, particularly the AJ flashback, it's the point where it does get a little bit deeper and more affecting. I think just the whole backstory. You find out why he is who he is, why he's become what he is. So I mean, those I don't tend to cry individual. Sometimes I cry. I'm English, so I've had my my tear ducts surgically sewn up. So we have to keep a stiff upper lip about these things. I sometimes have a reaction to a great sequence of cinema or something like that, and 2 or 3 times in the course of this film, I just felt the hackles go up on the back of my neck. When you feel like something very exciting is happening. So there is a kind of response to it. But yeah, no, that flashback is a very emotional few minutes. And actually, he does more with AJ than he does with Alia. So at least one guest star gets something worthwhile to do, I think.
Yeah,
I think the other sequence that was pretty close was when she is telling Bheem the story, Rama's story, and Bheem recognizes what's going on, and then he starts to cry because he's just fighting for his land, and Rama's fighting for free people. And I think that was also another moment where they do go a little bit deeper emotion with the 2 characters and how they are alike but didn't understand.
Yeah.
I think that one sequence where NTR, like Bheem's character, he finds the kid that he came here, like in that fortress, and the kid doesn't want him to go, and he has to like compose and then sing the song, which they sang. For me, that got me a little bit, because the kid just doesn't understand that he can't do it. He can't just take her off right now. So that sort of struggle that he had underneath, that sort of got me a little bit.
Yeah. I just have few more things, and we are only more than an hour. Can we continue? Just few more things.
Sure.
Are we okay with that? Great. So
yeah,
coming to, I think there was a question also in the chat talking about the scene where he rescues Ram. Bheem rescues Ram, and there's a question that the action sequence in the first half throughout is amazing, but by the end in the second half they go to that mask thing that they're kind of flying and taking so many people alone and all of that. So what are your thoughts on that? Like why is it works for you, but sometimes most people it doesn't? Like it's like too much. Okay, now you just crossed the line. Like where's the line for you?
Well, it's almost like it doesn't leave itself anywhere to go after that after that sequence of around on either side of the interval, other than even more over the top to the point where it almost gets fantastical. I think it becomes mythological in the second half. I think it more all of the pretense of it being any kind of historical realism is all dropped, and they are just mythological characters, which is why they're leaping through the forest or whatever. So that made sense to me, and I went with it. I do think the set pieces in the first half are stronger than the set pieces in the second half. I think those are the ones that have stayed with me. The whipping that turns into a song sequence, that will stay with me because I'd never seen anything like that before. If the Passion of the Christ suddenly turned into a full-blown musical, that's kind of what that sequence is doing. But it's almost like it with the exception of the final sort of raid on the governor's mansion when they go back and the flaming motorcycle, it almost doesn't leave itself. It's almost gone so far over the top that they have to kind of go in a completely different direction. So for me, the first half was stronger than the second half, but it didn't. I still enjoyed the second half.
Yeah. Sana in the chat says when Rajamouli is the director, you just erase that line.
I mean, I think that line was probably erased when the tigers jumped out of the truck. That feels like anything's possible at that point.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I won't take credit for this because I didn't even notice it until I read his review, but Bharwaj Rangan's review of the film, he talks about how it's a film of two halves and how the two halves mirror each other. And the thing that I've seen people not complain about, but mention as something that's illogical, like that matters, is the piggyback sequence escaping from the jail, and that sort of mirrors the piggyback sequence at the beginning of the film after Not. Like, because of that, it makes sense. Like that's storytelling. That's it's not about logic at that point. And so I really liked all that stuff. Yeah, it does turn a little bit massy, but again, this is Rajamouli we're dealing with, and it's not the craziest thing he's ever done on screen, and it's probably not going to be the craziest thing he'll do in the next few years either. But those sequences are just so thrilling to watch, to see things. And this is the thing I keep going back to with Rajamouli, is that I don't know what he's going to do, but I know that I will have never seen it before. And that's always exciting, to feel like you're in the hands of a filmmaker who is going to show me something new. Because that's all we really want, as film fans. We like to see our favorite stars, yes, but we want to see them doing something they haven't ever done before. And that's always the case in a Rajamouli film. It's never the same as anybody else's work, and it's never even the same as his own work. And so seeing those crazy sequences toward the end, the final, the forest battle, is incredible and so well choreographed and so well timed and edited together. And I had friends that watched it that said, in the States, we're so tired of the superhero style, Zack Snyder-esque, like speed ramping, slow-mo into fast motion, all that kind of stuff. And Rajamouli does that the entire film, and it never gets boring. It's always exciting. The way that the two characters interact during that final forest sequence, where, every one action has a reaction with the other character. You hit something and the flaming stick flies through the air, and then Rama catches it and uses it to hit somebody else. Even the escape where he's escaping with Mali, and Rama shoots the villain, and Bheem thinks that he's shooting at somebody else, but it's timing is all so perfect, and everything is so well executed that you're just swept up in all of it. Well, I'm swept up in all of it. And so that's good enough for me. Just show me some new stuff, and it all works out. That's why I'm happy to go see films like this over and over again, and pay ridiculous amounts for those tickets here, because they are not cheap.
Yes, I've heard that.
So it's those things don't bother me, and in fact, I enjoy them. It is part of the reason that years and years ago when I first started watching South Indian films was because the action is over the top and it's creative and it's fun. It's not always great as far as like the film is concerned, but a lot of times the action is enough to sort of get you through the slower parts of the film. It's just that in RRR, there are no slower parts of the film. It's all great, and the action is just punctuation. It's just the icing on top of an already very good cake.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with the fact that the action in the second half was definitely a lot more over the top. I think in the first half there was a little bit more groundedness to what was happening. Like the characters were at least getting hit, they were getting hurt. And I think in the second half, I love the whole piggybacking thing. Like for me, that action sequence is really well choreographed. Like him, Ram Charan just sitting on top of NTR and just hitting everyone. That was great. For me, after that, it just kept getting explained. I had this one point where I literally put my hand in my head. I was like, "Oh, what is happening?" But then I realized, okay, this is a Rajamouli movie. And then I just got back into the mode, and then I was able to enjoy it. So this is like fraction of 5 seconds where I thought, "Oh, this is too much." In that whole end sequence where like Ram Charan is putting those arrows in and everything. And for me, the movie lost me a little bit over there, to be very honest. But I sort of came back towards the end, like, especially when I think when NTR threw that bike, that was when I was like, is that a little too much? But I think after a few seconds, I was like brought in. I was like, okay, it's okay, it's still enjoyable. It still makes sense in a storytelling way rather than more of a realistic point of view. Like, so I sort of still enjoyed it at the end.
Yeah. When Ram Charan's character gets that reveal, that lighting and everything, that was just, that blew me away because, I've grown up watching Mahabharata, Ramayana on TV. We had cartoons, we have TV shows, and, you always expect this reveal that, like he has attained this avatar of Ram or Lord Vishnu, that he is now here to, clean off the evil. And at that moment, as you said, right, that mythology comes in, that they have ascended at this moment and now they are gonna take them all down. Now it's not about they are, just more than an average man and they'll struggle, So I saw it in that way and, just loved it. Now, just a few more things. Now, hear me out. I'm just talking about the practicality of it and not the merit of it. What do you think of sending RRR as India's official entry for Oscar next year? Because my thing is that the last movie from India got nominated was Lagan, and we of course already I have a film which was amazing, and I felt that should be an entry merit wise, but practicality, I feel this film can really make it. But what do you guys think?
I would think that there's a real struggle going on. There's a struggle that goes on every year within the Indian film industry. What kind of picture of ourselves do we want to send overseas? Do we send something more considered and art housey, as we did last year, or do we send something more popularist? And whenever the official announcement is made as to which film India is sending over, there's then a huge backlash on it because the other half go, "Oh no, actually we should send whatever." I think it's a good movie, and you want to send a good movie to represent yourself, but also at the same time, it's April now. It'll be another 8 months before that decision is taken. This movie has already proven itself several times over around the world. It doesn't necessarily need Oscar validation.
Yeah.
So let's just wait and see. I thought we were done with Oscar talk after 3 weeks ago, but now already too soon.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be upset if this were sent as like Mike said, it's April. There's a lot of 2022 left, and also, as he said, there's always a big discussion about why they choose the films they choose. I think that the choices may have had merit as quote unquote great films, but the Oscars are a popularity contest. It's, if you don't have visibility for your film's not going to get very far in the process.
Yeah.
Which I love Jallikattu. Like I booked the international premiere of that film, or the US premiere of that film. I was very, very happy to show it. I've been stumping for Lijo for years and years and years, almost as long with Rajamouli. And I think it certainly would have been a wonderful selection. It was a wonderful selection to send, but it never really went anywhere in the States. There wasn't, one of our theater chains, the Alamo Drafthouse, showed it for like a couple of weeks later in the year because they made some sort of deal with the filmmakers, but it didn't get the kind of notoriety that a film like that needs in order to break through to the final telecast, the short lived that gets on the telecast. And that's one thing that Triple R has in its favor, is that it does have notoriety. People have seen this film. People who make movies in Hollywood have seen this film and are in love with it. Is it going to work for the older part of the Academy, which is a lot of the Academy? Probably not. It's a little bit outlandish. But at the same time, you kind of only one movie actually wins, and only 5 movies actually make it to the telecast. So if they're trying to make a name for Indian cinema and to make it more visible, if that's the goal of the committee, then this is not a bad choice. I mean, if we stopped the year right now, this would not be a bad choice.
Yeah.
I would say just send it, just to have the Academy members' mind just blown away by watching this. They might not vote on it, but they'll be just like, what did I just watch?
I mentioned it previously also. I really don't care about the Oscars. It doesn't define anything. No, I know. I'm coming to that. Like, for me, I'll watch a movie and decide if it's really good or not. And no award can determine a film is good or not. So I don't believe in that concept. But I think for me, what happened with Parasite, right? How the Korean industry got a boom. That's what I expect from Oscar. It's just a marketing tool, and and that will open floodgates for Indian cinema, in every category, every genre, So I think that's my aim. It's just a marketing thing, nothing else. It doesn't define that a film is good or not. So that's my only aim, and that's why I wanted to ask this question. But the next thing I want to ask, so I think both of you had mentioned about, okay, there are a lot of articles about the politics of the film, and I don't want to get into the details of that, but I want to ask you, and all these articles are at the end states that, it's not about the film, but the interpretation of it, how people can take it. So I want to ask you, what do you think an artist is responsible for what people are interpreting the art for? Or indirectly or directly, he meant to do that or not, irrespective of that. Do you think they are, it's their job to look after what the message it's giving out?
Well, in terms of its politics, I got the sense that Rajamouli was playing it very cannily, in the way that Spielberg always plays his big blockbuster movies, very cannily, in that it's not conspicuous either way. There are things that you could read as left-wing, there are things you could read as right-wing. I think he's more concerned than anything else on getting an audience into the cinema and getting bums on seats, which he has succeeded in doing. I have read some very interesting political analysis of little details in the film where people have spotted things that you could read a certain way. I'm not entirely certain that that's Rajamouli's biggest concern. He doesn't strike me as an overtly political filmmaker. I think I think there are clearly politics within the film related to colonialism and so forth. But I don't think that's his primary objective, to sort of deliver a political lecture. I think his objective is to entertain and to blow your mind, and that's something he's clearly achieved. I mean. It's hard to discuss a film like that as a political text because it's not overt, and there's no sort of overt political leanings as far as I could see. I know people have spotted things in there, and I do think, from what I did spot, that actually it's all a bit there's a degree of bet hedging going on. Rajamouli doesn't want to offend anyone or alienate anyone, and as we've seen from many other films released in the last few years, it's so easy to offend or alienate a section of your audience with a particular depiction. So for me, it struck me as the political aspect of it, other than them booing the British, which is fair enough. We can take it. We've had this for many centuries from all the places we've occupied, and we deserve every single minute of it. Other than that, I don't know how it necessarily relates to the politics of contemporary India. But Josh may have a different opinion on it altogether.
I think that's fairly well stated. It's probably more. I think it's very difficult, and it's very potentially even unfair to hang that kind of additional onus on the filmmaker to be responsible for the reactions of others. Certainly, we can only be responsible for the things that we do. So if there is something overt, then maybe that's something you need to be concerned with. But if people are reading into things that you don't intend, that's a sticky situation, a slippery slope that maybe that's there and maybe it's not. I've seen people read films in ways that are very much not intended by the creator behind them. And so I think, like Mike says, Rajamouli's main primary goal is to entertain his audience. And he's very, very good at achieving that goal. He uses the stories that he uses because, if you read anything or any kind of interviews with him, he has stated multiple times that he is spiritually atheist. And so he uses these characters because while he may not be a religious person, he is very much a student of storytelling. And these are some of the greatest, richest stories ever written in the world. And so why wouldn't you incorporate that into these films that, this audience, the culture? Why would you not exploit that? To try and make a film that connects with as many people as possible. And there have been, again, this is lots of religious and caste stuff that I don't understand, but there's been discussion about, the depictions of the characters in relation to their real life basis. Yeah. And that I can't, really comment on that because it's outside of my realm of knowledge. But I don't think that it's necessarily fair to hang that sort of responsibility on the filmmaker to be responsible for what everyone thinks of everything all the time. Yeah.
All right. So the last thing I want to talk about. So S.S. Rajamouli's next project is supposed to be a action adventure set in Africa with Mahesh Babu. So any expectations? Any thoughts? There also talks about sequel for RRR. I don't know how that's gonna happen, but
yeah, I saw that from some party that they mentioned sequel to, and I was like, I don't know. This seems like a pretty well, rounded concept that's done. Like, I'm cool with this being the end of this story, because frankly, one of those real life characters only lived like another 3 years after the movie ends, so not much room to go from there.
It's what happens when you pick fights with tigers.
Yeah,
your life expectancy shrinks immediately.
Yeah. Honestly, I know about as much about I don't know anything. I'm not a huge follower of Mahesh Babu. I know I've seen one or two of his films, but I'm not like a huge fan. I'm a fan of Rajamouli, so whatever he does, I'll be there for on the first day. That's where my interest lies. And I think hopefully Mahesh Babu understands the exact same thing, is that he might be the guy that's on screen most of the time, but he's there in service of Rajamouli's story, which everyone, they show up on that set.
Yeah, I'm in exactly the same place. It's the director that draws me to a project rather than the stars. And after RRR, I think if Rajamouli goes overseas, if he does something a bit more international, then I am absolutely there for that, because the films are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're not losing any quality. That's the extraordinary thing. They are still made with the same attention and care, attention to detail that we've seen all along in his career. And so for me, I'll be there come what may. I'm this close to bucking my ticket already, and I don't think it's been there's not been a release date announced or anything. But after RRR, I'm back for more. I'm all in.
Yeah, Manoj, you there? Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Yeah.
I had to take a quick call, a personal call.
No worries. Yeah, any thoughts
on the next project, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just heard the next project and the call came. I was like, oh shit.
You were getting cast. This was the casting call.
I was.
You're booked on the next flight to Kinshasa. You've got to get out there at 6:30 in the morning.
See, I mean, with Rajamouli, I think you can't really say much from, like, when RRR was coming out, like when I heard about the movie, I think we didn't really think much about it. Then you saw the first teaser, the first trailer, like, okay, this is going to be something extraordinary. So it's going to be an action adventure. That's what I heard.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be really great. Like whatever he does, although we probably won't be seeing it for the next 5 years. He's going to take his sweet time with the next one. But I think with RR, you could really see how much he developed as a filmmaker from Bahubali. He's getting more comfortable, like sort of making this large-scale movies. When you compare it with something like Iga, like you can sort of see his evolution as a filmmaker in that
Yeah.
way. So I'm really excited to see what he comes up with next.
Yeah. And very big weekend coming for all of us. Big films coming out. So all the best. And I think you can wrap it up here. Again, it was a great discussion. Thank you for coming. I was very nervous. Shout out to Suchin. He helped me and assured me it would be fine. And you both gentlemen were amazing. It was so much fun. It was like talking to friends. So, and you are such big personalities. You're your work. You're so credible. You have so much experience, and it was just amazing to chat with you guys.
Thank you for having us. It's been yeah. The time has flown by. It's been really good fun. Let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
Definitely. I'll keep in touch. And again, chat, thank you for all your questions. They're still fighting, but you guys can have your opinions. But thank you for joining us. I hope you had a great time, and we'll see you next time. And if you're watching the replay, do hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment, and follow these guys. The link in the description. You can check out their blogs. You can follow them on Twitter. And yeah, that's it. Thank you, and we'll see you next time. Bye. All right. I hope you guys had fun.